Coming up on this week's show, more 7/7 prior knowledge, the latest alternative headlines, this week on Resistance Radio, and a debunking of the Glenn Beck-Jared Loughner conspiracy. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the WideShut Webcast on wideshut.co.uk. I'm your host Keelan Balderson, and let's take a look at some of this week's top alternative news headlines. The official story of 7/7 has been thrown into doubt once again, as two previously buried stories have re-emerged during the ongoing coroner's inquest. One comes from Martin Gilbertson, who worked alongside alleged bombers Mohammed Sadiq Khan and Shihzad Tanweer at the Iqra Islamist bookshop in Leeds. He retold the story at the February 15th afternoon hearing about how he became so concerned with the extremist literature available and the behaviour of the alleged bombers that he warned West Yorkshire Police of their names 2 years before the London attacks. Despite being called a liar by police barristers, he told Channel 4 News that he sticks by what he said.
I did not lie to the court.
Have you ever lied in the past about your version of events regarding the bombers, the 7th of July bombers?
No.
And your dealings with them?
No, I haven't lied.
The police don't believe you.
I know the police don't believe me, but I don't believe half of what the police say anyway.
But why is there not a single jot of evidence, according to West Yorkshire Police,
I don't know.
that
they're the ones who say that.
Letter, that package ever was received by the police?
I never said it was received. I said I sent it to them. Whether they received it or not, they're saying they didn't receive it. And all of a sudden, I'm a criminal. I don't regret going to the police about 7/7. I will not regret the interviews I gave to the police.
I think the question is, Mr. Gilbertson, did you actually ever go to the police? Or did you make this up?
I did not make that up. I did send that to the police.
Did you make anything else up?
No, I haven't made anything up. My mind, the dates may be slightly out, but I haven't made anything up. Because everything I've said, I've shown evidence that it had happened.
Although it's possible that he's lying, it's hard to imagine a motive. It could be that the items that he sent just got lost in the post. The mainstream media have not given the police in question the same intrusive interview. It could be that they're the ones lying to hide their incompetence. In a 2006 Guardian article that has since been deleted offline, a police spokesperson said, "It's going to be almost impossible to trace what happened to a specific item of mail. We don't have an anti-terrorist squad, and there's no way of saying to where it might have gone from the mailroom. We get all sorts of material on extremist groups, but it's impossible to say whether this made its way into the intelligence system, whether it was discounted as low-level intelligence, or whether it was acted upon in some way." So it's clear that at one point the police were happy to concede that the item might have gone missing on their end, rather than Mr. Gilbertson being a liar. In other 7/7 news, convicted terrorist Mohammed Junaid Babar was released from US custody 4 years into a possible 70-year sentence, and some of that time was spent on the outside. Babar, whose own mother was in the World Trade Center on 9/11, is famous for telling the media that he was going to kill Americans in the Middle East.
I did grow up there, but that doesn't mean that my loyalty is with the Americans. My loyalty has always been, is, and forever will be with the Muslims. I'm willing to kill the American soldiers if they enter into Afghanistan with their ground troops. I'm willing to kill the Americans, and if the Americans use Pakistan soil as its basis, we'll kill them here in Pakistan too.
It's unsure why a hardline jihadist would parade around his identity to the media and reveal his intentions to the world. It might seem odd to people that the United States, this supposed leader in the war against terror, that would send people to Guantanamo Bay for less, would release Junaid Babar so early. But they did this because he's actually a Western intelligence asset. And that's not new information. We've known that for many years. I covered it in my film 7/7 The Big Picture. But what's finally being reported, and which is now more concrete, is that he was actually on the FBI payroll while he was running the terrorist training camp in Pakistan, that the alleged 7/7 ringleader Mohammed Sadiq Khan attended. And in regards to intelligence assets and 7/7, Junaid Babar isn't the only one. If we go back through the records to 2004 and Operation Crevice, which became the fertilizer bomb trial, there's another dubious character called Mohammed Qayyum Khan, which was shortened to Q. And Q, it turned out, in this trial, was the one who instructed Mohammed Sadiq Khan to go to Babar's terrorist training camp. And believe it or not, folks, the only two people that walked away free from this fertilizer bomb trial was Junaid Babar, who was flown in and given immunity to testify, despite being part of the plot, and Mohammed Q, who just walked away free despite it being admitted that he helped fund the ringleader of the fertilizer bomb plot. And when Mohammed Sadiq Khan came back from this terrorist training camp ran by an FBI asset, he was then further instructed by a man named Harun Rashid Aswat. He was widely reported as the mastermind behind the attacks. It was reported that there were phone call records in the days before the attacks, and it was well established that this Harun Rashid Aswat was part of the 7/7 attacks. And US Federal Prosecutor John Loftus and other sources, including French sources and Christopher Berry D, who is a former high-ranking army commander writing in the New Criminologist, they came out and said that Harun Rashid Aswat was also intelligence, but he was a British MI6 intelligence asset. So at every stage, this Mohammed Sadiq Khan was influenced by a whole host of different intelligence assets. And, you know, the reason why Junaid Babar was released after 4 years is because he wasn't really a legitimate terrorist. He was simply an intelligence asset. Why else would the United States do that? And, you know, some people say, well, why would they do that? Well, you know, we don't want to speculate, but America and the UK have a long track record of being involved in terrorism and intelligence blunders. On the United States front, we can take the Christmas Day Detroit underpants bomber. Kurt Haskell was recently on Resistance Radio with Travis, and, you know, he said the story that a lot of you now know, that this Abdul Muttalib was a known terrorist, was on the terrorist watch list. His father said, I think my son might be involved in terrorism. It then came out during Homeland Security hearings that Muttalib's visa wasn't revoked due to orders from high up in the intelligence services. And if we go to Kurt Haskell's own testimony, he witnessed Muttalib being escorted onto the plane by an official-looking figure without a passport. So in essence, the American intelligence services allowed Muttalib onto the plane. If we go to a UK example, a lot of the Irish terrorism has involved the British security services. Kevin Fulton, a well-known whistleblower who was a double agent for British intelligence, he said that the Omar bombings, which has been back in the news recently due to a lot of the dubious stuff that's been going on, he said that the Omar bombing, which was the largest terrorist attack in the UK before 7/7, was allowed to happen because the British had an agent on the inside of the terrorist cell that carried out the attack that they didn't want to blow the cover of. So they allowed people to die so they didn't unravel this big string of intelligence, dubious intelligence activities and intelligence assets. You could even go to the Soviet-Afghan war, where America funded hundreds of thousands of mujahideen and worked directly alongside Osama bin Laden. Of course, FBI whistleblower Sibel Edmonds said that bin Laden was working with the American government right up until the day of 9/11 itself. We could go to the 90s and the crisis in Kosovo, where the CIA and Britain funded more extreme jihadists to fight the Serbians. And Al-Mujahirun, the network in Britain of these jihadists, was allowed to flourish during this time period under something called a covenant of security, a policy of appeasement, so that these people could be sent over to train in terrorist training camps. Omar Bakri, the leader of this group, said he was closely monitored by the intelligence agencies and was allowed to send young British men overseas for terror training. So, unfortunately, it's common practice for the US and UK to be involved in terrorism, to make blunderous intelligence decisions, and to be directly involved with the terrorist attacks. And they seem to be reporting in the news, you know, that Britain's outraged that America would release this guy. But it's kind of ridiculous to say that, because elements of the British establishment have hindered the investigation into 7/7 at every step. You know, successive governments have refused a public independent inquiry despite calls from the victims' family members time and time again. It was the intelligence services that said, oh no, we didn't know anything about these bombers, they're clean skins. And then it came out they were actually surveilling them for years before the attacks. There were warnings from Saudi Arabia. King Abdullah has said that he gave specific intelligence that there was going to be an attack on the London transit system, and he said Britain didn't act upon it. There was warning from Israel, warnings from Spain, warnings from France that there was an imminent attack coming on Britain. And months before the attacks, they actually lowered the terrorist threat level despite all of this intelligence information. On the day itself, there was a report that went all around the world's news media that Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel was given a prior warning to stay in his hotel room before the blasts. It came out now only a few days ago that there were actually anti-terror drills envisaging attacks on the London transit system in the days before the attacks. And then on the day itself, Peter Power of Visor Consultants, a crisis management team working with Reed Elsevier, a global publisher, were in an office actually working on a scenario that envisaged some of the same tube lines that were attacked on the day, and this was occurring at the exact same time of the attacks on the day. It is quite clear that there was some very specific intelligence before the attacks that there was going to be an attack on the London transit system, and they lowered the terrorist threat level.
Every time I hear that Barber's been released or he was on bail for 2 years and so has been wandering the streets of America free. In fact, I hear he's now married with children himself. Fills me with anger because it points to complicity with the American Secret Service in his role in Pakistan. And that suggests then that whilst Barber was running the training camps, training people to commit mass murder, that was with the full knowledge of the American Secret Service. If he was running those training camps with the knowledge of the American Secret Service, it's inconceivable he wasn't passing information of people who were attending those camps to the Americans. So that then begs the question, why didn't the Americans tell the MI5? Or if they did tell MI5, why wasn't something done?
Earlier this week, Bulldog child abuse investigator Bill Maloney of Pie and Mash Films tried to bring to light some of the institutionalised abuse facing young offenders during a chance meeting with Justice Secretary Ken Clarke.
Good advert there. We will
of course it's an advert because I just told you I am fighting against child abuse, especially institutions.
But you're happy we demolished Shirley Oak?
Well, Shirley Oak should have been investigated. I think it should have been excavated, and we should have had a look the same as we did about Hope de la Garenne. We've got a place up in Darlington called St Peter's as well. So I think it should have been investigated a lot more, and I think the perpetrators who are still alive, the perpetrators of all this abuse, because can I just say to you, yeah madam, but can I just say to you, the reason I'm talking about institutional abuse is because 90% of all children in our institutions are from these kind of areas, and in a young trainer, Ken, I'm just going to educate you.
If you want to catch the perpetrators, you need to give us the names.
But this is really important. Now the point is that 90% of all young offenders that go into these institutions that are run by private companies like Serco, one child can demand £200,000 a year just to keep a child, and they're being abused and they're using unlawful restraining techniques.
But we're not going to sort it here on the pavement.
Unlawful, yeah, brother. That's how you talk to the people, Ken. Do you know about Adam Rickwood? I investigate. Adam Rickwood was found hanging in himself. It's very good. I'll get in touch with you on email, and I'll never see you again.
Mrs. Stubbs. Hello? Mrs.
And my film company is called PieandMashFilms.com. Can you remember that? Okay.
And
we're going to be doing a piece. I'll be putting a piece up on this. So you check out PieandMashFilms.com, and then you'll get in touch with us, my friend.
Ken Clarke, who sits on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group, has become a controversial figure in the coalition government for proposing several schemes to make profits off prisons and policing. Some of the new measures coming into place by summer this year include a 40-hour-plus working week for inmates, with profits being siphoned off for various causes. Foreign nationals will be given the opportunity of accepting a fine and deportation rather than prosecution, and the private sector is to run community punishments and the probation service. As reported by the Financial Times, Ken Clarke has thrown open the 1.6 probation market to private sector companies such as Serco and G4S. Ken Clarke told Sky News, "We will make it easier for prison governors to bring more private companies into their jails to create well-run businesses employing prisoners in regular 9-to-5 jobs." Prison Minister Crispin Blunt put it rather bluntly when he said he wanted Britain to be a global leader in inviting businesses to come into prisons to take advantage of the effectively free labour. Although headlines speak of a minimum wage, inmates will only receive credits to buy prison amenities substantially lower in value than a minimum wage. Profits go to the prison system and private companies. One good thing at least is that some of it will go towards victim groups. There are currently 12 privately operated prisons in the United Kingdom. That was some of this week's alternative news headlines. For further details and stories not covered on this week's show, please visit wideshut.co.uk. But now, let's take a look back at this week on Resistance Radio.
And let's not forget that this drill that they're talking about just days before 7/7 isn't the only pre-event drill predicting the 7/7 attacks with mind-blowing accuracy, as well as this one and the one on the Panorama show, and the one on the day itself, of course, with Peter Power. There was another one called, another drill called Atlantic Blue. And this article about that is from The Guardian. And this isn't as widely known as the Panorama show or the Peter Power exercise, but I think it's worth mentioning again, even if you're familiar with it. This is from an article about it from The Guardian, dated the 10th of July 2005, just days after the attacks. Anti-terror drill revealed soft targets in London. A massive anti-terror exercise carried out last April to find out how safe London's transport systems were from attack raised concerns over the vulnerability of passengers, the Observer can reveal.
I mean, here in the States, we have dozens, maybe a dozen examples of where the FBI, they don't even use a guy in between. The FBI just gives the bombs to the guys, and then the guys record them like Salon did, like Ahmad Salon did in the 93 World Trade Center bombings. The head of the FBI cooked the bomb, trained the driver, he recorded the phone conversations, it came out in court, now he's gone. And the FBI gave him the bomb. Same thing with the Christmas tree bomber in Oregon. Same thing with the Wrigley Field bombers.
The duality of the individual and the collective. Yes, you're an individual, but you're also part of a collective. That's how human beings work. That's how we got here. It was only when the ancient tribes or the ancient proto-humans realised that by subdividing what they do as a group, by spreading the workload, they could get more done as a whole organism operating together. One individual could only get so much done within a day, whereas a group of individuals would get a lot more done, so they all benefit, so you end up with more spare time and you end up with a growth of culture and the develop of what we call humanity today, Homo sapiens sapiens.
Maybe that's why I've got such an interest in, deconstructing media and researching things. When I was in college, there was actually a class called propaganda. It was very, very popular. And I took that class.
Because they sold it well?
No, well, this teacher was a bit of a maverick, as Sarah Palin would say, I guess, because they ended up firing him. But he was talking about all this stuff that we're talking about now, and this was a long time ago. This was like in 1991 or 2 or 3, maybe 93 or 94 at the latest. It was like in the early 90s somewhere. And he was teaching us about how they use propaganda to divert our attention and how they use it to manipulate us. He was talking about AIDS and HIV and how they use fear tactics and how they use, racial profiling in the media and things like that.
How do you know it's an explosion? And it's just a boom, and it's just a bang. Well, no, there were people on the scene, many of them very experienced with explosions, firefighters, and also I collected separately the Port Authority Police Department's accounts, police officers, firefighters, and my current list, by the way, of eyewitnesses to explosions is at 155, and I think it's a bit arrogant to say that they're all wrong and that they didn't actually experience explosions. I think that it's clear that most of them did.
If you search like Butcher of Bahrain, it was an ITN documentary, because this guy actually lives on the edge of Dartmoor now. He lives in a massive house on the edge of Dartmoor, so he's just kind of slunk off, to retirement, and they tried to get in touch with him, and he wasn't having any of it. It sounds like a really, unpleasant character, and there were interviews with Bahrainians who said he'd been personally involved in the torture. I believe children were abused as well, all in the name of repressing this resistance, which was a resistance to restore democracy. So this guy is just a complete evil piece of work, he's denied all of these accusations, but all of the evidence, very much suggests what the people have accused him of was genuine.
Join me this coming Tuesday at 8 PM GMT on Resistance Radio, when I'll be talking to Richard Hoyle, who was on the summer excavation team at the Bosnian Valley of the Pyramids. Welcome back to the WideShut Webcast with me, Keelan Balderson. I hope everybody's enjoying the show so far. I'm going to try and cut it down to the dead on 30 mark this week. And actually, if you notice, I'm going to be calling it the WideShut Webcast on here, and then on Resistance Radio, I'm going to be calling it the WideShut Radio, which I think makes more sense so people, understand that these are different shows. But this is the provoking thought segment where I kind of break down something in a more laid back manner, and this week I'm going to be talking about this strange, quite stupid conspiracy theory that Jared Lee Loughner is Glenn Beck, or that Jared Lee Loughner never existed and they photoshopped somebody into existence to look like Glenn Beck or whatever. I first heard about this on All Xcast's Adonis King's Mind Wars on Resistance Radio. He had one of the Truther girls on, and he slipped that in there. It wasn't really part of the show. They didn't really talk about it, but she interviewed this guy that started this conspiracy theory on her YouTube channel or whatever. I'm not really too hip on the Truther girls. I don't think she is part of the scam or whatever, but she had this guy on. And I'm just going to break down why this is completely and utterly ridiculous. Glenn Beck is not Jared Lee Loughner. Jared Lee Loughner more than likely did exist. And let's take a look. This is the famous mugshot of Jared Lee Loughner, the Arizona shooter. There's nothing to suggest that this isn't him. No eyewitnesses have come forward and said that this isn't him. The guy clearly does exist. That doesn't rule out any other scenario. I think his YouTube account is dodgy. But in this context, this is Jared Lee Loughner. This is a picture of Glenn Beck, Fox News' truth hijacking a disinfo agent. Note the shape of the suit and the orange background. Now look at this edited version of Jared Lee Loughner's face being superimposed on the Glenn Beck picture. We know it's the same Glenn Beck picture because we can see the orange background and the line of the suit. Was Loughner photoshopped to look like Glenn Beck? No, it's the other way around, and any experienced graphic designer, as the guy who made this is, can quite clearly see that. So who's peddling this story? It's a guy named Ed Curini, and he's a former US Air Force technician. He just so happens to have worked for Halliburton, ExxonMobil, and also helped produce the documentary JFK, A Case for Conspiracy. So he's got quite a background. And I think the bigger conspiracy here is, why would somebody who worked for the US government and some of the most evil corporations in the world want to make Glenn Beck look like a figure that the establishment would want to target? Is it because they want to legitimize Glenn Beck as the false opposition? So making it look like Beck is being framed. I mean, I don't mean being framed as in, they're not saying that Glenn Beck is Jared Lee Loughner. What they're saying is that he's been photoshopped to look like Glenn Beck. So psychologically, people look at Glenn Beck and it triggers something, you know, oh, he's like a bad person. It doesn't even make much sense, to be honest. But making it look like Glenn Beck is being framed by the elite gives him credibility with the anti-NWO crowd, or some of those people that are just waking up and think Glenn Beck is legitimate. It could also be that this is a straw man set up to, you know, go, well, look at these nuts over here, look at these idiots, they think Glenn Beck is Jared Lee Loughner, don't go look over there. Or the guy who photoshopped this could be just doing it for a laugh, or is a complete loony. But just be careful, folks, because there is disinfo out there, and if you don't tackle it headstrong, sometimes you can get lumped in with that disinfo. Catch you next week.